Hi everyone, this is Heather Lottinen from the Flourish Academy. This is episode 509. Have you heard of or do you use white balance bracketing on your camera? This came up in the Flourish Academy community group recently and I thought to myself, well, that's strange. I've never used that. I am curious if you do use it, what the application is. So we have talked about exposure bracketing in the past, and exposure bracketing and white balance bracketing, while similar, produce different results. So with exposure bracketing, you set up your camera to produce 3, 5, 7, or 9 different exposures when you take a photograph. But you have to take that number of photographs. So for instance, if I am trying to photograph, for me it would be a church with a blue sky and the church is in the shade, I will set my bracketing usually to 5 shots, and I will stand and compose a shot, and I will I will release my shutter 5 times. And each time I take a photograph, the camera will change the exposure by an amount that I set so that I will have 5 different photographs. Ultimately, one where the church is exposed properly and the sky is exposed properly. I combine those in Lightroom and I get one final image. We've talked about that, exposure bracketing. But I never played with white balance bracketing. So on the D750, and for most cameras, this is going to be a custom setting. But for the D750, if you go to your menu and then you go to your custom menu setting, this is in the E section, E for bracketing and flash, and it's E6. When you go to E6, it says auto bracketing set. So you have auto exposure and flash, auto exposure, flash, white balance bracketing, or ADL bracketing. So mine was on AE and flash, which means I could use exposure bracketing and flash bracketing. I just put it on white balance bracketing, and then you would press the bracketing button and your back command dial to tell it how many shots you would like it to take. Now for the D750, you only have the option, not shots, because this is different, of 3 different versions of that image. So when you're doing exposure bracketing, you're actually releasing the shutter the number of times that you have set the bracket. So that's 3, 5, 7, or 9. White balance bracketing, you only take 1 photograph, but the camera saves 3 with a varying amount of white balance settings depending on what you select in terms of, it's probably the Kelvin temperature. I don't know, I didn't look into this, with the front command dial. So when I press this button, bracketing, I use my back command dial to set this to 3. That's the only option. The front command dial says 1, 2, or 3, and that is the distance between the different exposure settings when you take the photo. Anyway, I pressed this button for white balance bracketing and it wouldn't work. And I thought, well, that's strange. Of course, I don't know what I'm doing because I've never used white balance bracketing, but I played around a little bit, checked my custom setting, and I thought, okay, I think I sort of understand. Why wouldn't it let me? Oh, I was set to RAW. White balance bracketing will only work in JPEG, and the reason is it creates 3 photos when you release the shutter 1 time. And RAW does not include white balance data. It's separate. It's separate from the RAW file itself because those are 2 different things. There is the file, the RAW file, the image data, and the information that gets assigned to it. So it doesn't work in RAW. You have to have the set on JPEG. Once I did that, bracketing started working. So I took a photo just a few moments ago. Anything nice here to take? Take a photo of the phone. Let's see if this works. So I just took 1 photo, and this is going to be very difficult for you to see. Let me put this, now I have it on 3. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but look at the edge of the phone, and do you see the color changing? Yeah, that's not a good example. You'll have to play with it yourself, but make sure you look in your camera manual. If you don't have it, look for it online. Just type in your camera model name and then white balance bracketing. I think most of the higher end DSLRs have it. I know the mirrorless has that option as well, and play around with setting it. And then let me know if and when you find a practical use for this, because this doesn't really work in the situations where I photograph, but maybe it does in some other instances. But keep in mind that for every photograph you take, let me rephrase, for every time you release the shutter, you are getting 3 photos. So obviously it's going to fill up your memory card faster, but maybe you're shooting this in a different type of application. It's going to give you 3 different images with different white balance settings, I guess, so you could maybe test or pick the best. I really can't see how, practically speaking, this would work, in the field, why you would have that set all the time. Anyway, it's a custom menu setting, so I don't want to leave it on because I use exposure bracketing. But it's the same button, which means you have to change the custom menu. So I'm going to go back into my menu. Again, it's the E custom menu. It's called Bracketing in Flash. This is E6. I currently have it set to white balance, but I use this for both flash. Well, I play around with flash, but I use it for exposure for sure. So I'm going to change this to be AE with the lightning bolt, which is auto exposure and flash. And if you look at E6 on my menu, you'll notice that it does not have an asterisk next to it. And what that means on the D750 is that I am in the default setting. So for instance, when I had that changed to white balance, do you see how E6 now has an asterisk above it? That tells me instantly. It's a really quick way to look at your menu and see where you have changed the default settings. So just put that back to the default, which is auto exposure and flash. That asterisk disappears, and now I'm back in business. If I press my bracketing button and then use my back command dial, I can change the number of shots and then the exposure in between those shots. So hopefully you found that useful. I'll see you in the next video.